Discussion on Applied Corporate Finance Unit 4, which is basically going to talk about the capital structure. Primarily, capital structure would talk about how much of the firm's money is raised via debt versus how much of it is via equity, right? And this is going to be a major discussion point around what is a good capital structure. So at the end of this unit, we should be able to understand whether a firm is working at what is an optimal ratio of debt versus equity, and whether there is an optimal ratio of debt versus equity. We're going to use live examples of some companies as we go around discussing this in more detail and try and look at how do we interpret the debt equity ratio of companies from a capital structure and cost of capital viewpoint, right? Now, we're going to cover a variety of things in this. We're going to look at what are the types of financings available, what are typical financing behaviors depending on what life cycle stage the business is in, process of raising capital, the trade-off of debt, which is essentially what are the uses, positives and negatives when a company decides to raise debt, optimal capital structure, and various approaches to arrive at this optimal capital structure. The last two are going to take bulk of our time, essentially, right? So let's understand initially in terms of our principles as to we are now looking at the financing decision. We have already looked at the investment decision. Within the financing decision that will maximize the value of the firm, we want to find the optimal mix of debt and equity that maximizes firm value, and the right kind of debt that matches the tenor of our assets, right? So the second one we'll take later, but the first one is essentially nothing but what we're trying to do is we're going to look at what basically maximizes the value, or in other words, reduces or minimizes the cost of capital. Correct? That's what we are trying to look at in the context of what debt equity ratio does that, or if there is any debt equity ratio that does that, right? Now, a firm can either raise money through equity or through debt. What is the broad differentiation between the two? In the case of equity, there is no fixed payout usually, and it is also, in a sense, it's a residual payout. If something is left, then it is given to the equity guys, and it is considered to be costlier as compared to debt. Debt has a fixed payout, and it's considered the first in preference of any kind of payout, and that's why it is less risky, considered less risky, and hence it is cheaper. So for any given firm, the cost of equity will always be greater than the cost of debt. That will always hold true, correct? And the reason it holds true is basically because the debt holders have a priority in the payment of debt, and if something goes wrong, the firm sells itself, it will first repay the debt holders, and then if something is left, that goes to the equity holders. That's why the equity guys get what is the residual claim, correct? So just summarizing, equity is residual payout, it is expensive, debt is fixed payout, it is cheaper, right? So that's the first construct that comes to us, that you could raise money using equity or debt, and then you could kind of use that in the business cycle over a period of time, and then define what is the debt and equity numbers that you see, right? Let's take a look at a few of the companies that we are discussing and try and understand what is the kind of indebtedness they work with, right? So if you look at the debt to equity number for something like Apollo Tires, right? So this is the equity number, which is 6182 crore. This is in millions, remember? So 6182 crore is the equity number. So if I was to put the equity number, that's going to be 6182, and I'm going to decide this in INR crore. 1 crore is 10 million, so 6282. And if I look at the debt number, long-term debt is 6095, and short-term debt is 7401, correct? So effectively 609 plus 740, right? That's what we are doing. So total debt comes up to 1349, correct? So effectively, if I was to look at the total capital, 6182 comes from equity, 1349 comes from debt. Total capital is 6182 plus